aren't necessarily like benevolent beings according to the Bible. The Nephilim, like, you know, tormented people. They ate human beings at a certain point. You know, they were the progeny, the offspring of in certain books and in certain interpretations of rape. You know, so it's not necessarily the magic of the Nephilim. And this, to me personally, all this stuff is a product of what I love Mark Stavish. He calls it therapeutic blasphemy. And it's like, I'm bored with Christ. Christianity was the dominant hierarchical paradigm of my lifetime. And yes, it was abused. So I'm going to throw the baby out with the bathwater because this is edgy and this is different. And it's like but when you really commit to understanding something, you don't need anything else. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it seems like I'm curious at the time frame of which this light bearer was said to have fallen too, because when you look at the conclusion of this strain of Luciferianism, it associates, like I was saying, Lucifer with Ahriman, and in this document that I was reading, it associates them as synonymous. This tradition that I
on mentioned. What grounds?
Right.
I'm curious on what grounds.
So I thought that was interesting too, because like you were mentioning with the Theosophical Society and like Steiner and the anthroposophical works of Steiner. And when you listen to Steiner and his model and the way that he describes Ahriman and Lucifer, basically like a dipole of forces, one more so of materialism and the other as more like mysticism.
Of intellect.
Which seeks to elevate us arrogantly beyond our actual capacities, abstraction and the balance being life in the middle as the Christ or the equilibrium. And then, you know, he speaks of the incarnation of the cosmic spirit of Christ descending down and uniting with the human, Yahshua, I think is what he actually referred to the name as. And the formation or inclination of the assemblage of an army of Christ and the arising aspirations of Jesuitism to attack spiritual scientific knowledge. And he gives this example of himself at this time, I guess, being attacked by the Jesuits. So I thought that was interesting too. And then he talks about prior to the incarnation of Christ, the dominant incarnate force of the time was that of the Luciferic. And he says, the Christ impulse shone its light into the best of Lucifer's endowments to humanity, and that the Christ impulse, that the Christ was only understood by virtue of what humanity had received from Lucifer. And as time went on, the Luciferic impulse faded. Then too did the understanding and ability to comprehend the true nature of the Christ impulse. At the time that the Gospels were written, people's state of consciousness was imbued with the Luciferic quality that allowed them to grasp the Gospels with a kind of Luciferic Gnosis. And how the Luciferic impulse faded with the emergence of the Ahrimanic, and how the Luciferic impulse faded with the emergence of the Ahrimanic, and how like the incarnation of the Luciferic and the Christic, so too will be an incarnation of Ahriman in the 3rd millennium AD, is what Steiner kind of lays out. And he talks about how Ahrimanic powers are sending down from supersensible worlds in order to secure as great of a following as possible via the obstruction of certain prevalent types of thinking, and that the only thing we can do basically is to prepare for that arrival. And that the people in power of the time, in the Luciferic time, were the initiates in this era, where it was this era of these priests and priest kings, and now are the time of the Luciferic was the initiates, then the era of the priests and priest kings during the time of Christ, and then now of economic man. the world is ruled by the agents of economic factors in the age of the Ahrimanic deception. And then he also talked about the spirit of cooperation that built the pyramids as being that of the time of the Luciferic. So I found that interesting after talking with you as well as Drew McKinnon, because he has visited Egypt a bunch, and you were just in Egypt, and you both kind of said something similar about the notion of perhaps the greatest secret was that of the cooperative attitude of humanity, and that, you know, what we can do with our cooperative will, and potentially the, you know, these great structures were built by the cooperation of humanity. But that's kind of related. But yeah, I just wanted to lay all that out because I found it's just so interesting listening to his take on things where he kind of breaks it down. And it does seem like there is this, you know, there has been this time of emergence of this sort of materialistic dissension, if you will. And, you know, if you read what he says, it seems like it all kind of lines up. So I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that he's using as symbol systems, at least, stuff that he's sort of, and I know that Steiner was, a quote unquote great channeler and intuitive and things like this. You know, I don't know. Do I know? I don't know. I'm not gonna debate with anybody. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but at the end of the day, I have tried my best to read some Steiner, and it's just we end out in like outer space, like the outer rim planets, really quick.
Sure.
So it's not, that to me is not ground that I can spend much time in. I prefer that stuff is a very, and this is for, I'm saying this as me now, right? One of the loudest people that you're gonna probably encounter, very animated New Yorker, you know, Italian and Greek, you know, shouting about things I care about. But I think that those types of channeled, received things, they're best kept as a personal gnosis. They're best kept as a personal guide. I don't believe that stuff it should be lectured publicly about. And I don't think that there is great value in, I mean, I think that's one of the things Crowley did. He absolutely found his higher divine genius, and you know what he did? He imposed that on the rest of the world. It's not, you know, that's for you, you know, that's the strict admonition of through initiatic systems indefinitely. Keep silence. That's where it's most apropos. When we're going to teach you how to do it, and we believe you can. And if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll make that contact. But that doesn't give you the right to go and start bandying that about, giving lectures, writing books on that kind of thing. You know, because it's for you, and it might not be true for other people. People might, you know, one of the things that Mathers says, Sam Mathers, one of the founders of the Golden Dawn, he writes in the early inner order documents that were circulated among the first class of the Golden Dawn. He says that to tell a person, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm close, to tell a person something that they are not prepared to understand is to do no better than to lie to them, because they will make the worst of it because they cannot understand it. So I see Steiner's point, and I see Blavatsky's point. I understand what they're saying in the symbol systems. When I hear you talk about that, I'm like, yeah, that sounds on the money to me. It sounds true. But the thing is that what's unclear to me is where the derivation of Lucifer and Ahriman, right, coming from. That's Zoroastrian. You know, that's
right.
Iranian sort of stuff. Where are we feeling like those are as archetypes? Sure, I understand exactly what he's talking about, but why this distinction? Like, was it channeled? Did you intuit it? Well, you know, that's fine, but you know, you can't, or maybe you shouldn't say that as if like this is objective truth, you know. I mean, but I understand that part of channeling is learning to sort of be attentive and receptive to the subjective worlds, the interior images that arise in our minds in order to communicate things that really transcend words. I understand that, but my confusion with that is where the derivation of Lucifer and Ahriman as agents of mysticism and materiality, to the exclusion of other, archetypes. Where does that come from? So,
Right.
but like I said earlier, I agree with all that. Like, I think that sounds very, very consonant with what is actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of a double-edged sword because, I mean, it could stir up interesting conversations and kind of elaborate on points, and people can go back and forth and stuff. But then it also does cause loads of confusion, I think. And but yeah, because it's like just trying to get to the bottom of this whole Lucifer thing and looking at the historical mentions, with Steiner or the Theosophical Society or anthroposophy. Those are fairly modern. And then you
Yeah.
look to some of the older sources, you see the one mention of it in the gospel that he had mentioned. And then I guess, yeah, maybe primarily Zoroastrianism, which is something that I haven't really explored too much. So I don't know how it depicts Lucifer, or is that the name that it goes by, or do you know much about that?
Not Lucifer. Lucifer is the Latin translation of, the morning star in the mention of that entity or astronomical body, for all we know, in the Old Testament. So not the New Testament, the Old Testament. And Ahriman is sort of this shortening of Angramanyu, which was the adversarial force of the universe in the dualistic conception of Zoroastrian or early Iranian cosmology, cosmogony, right? It was Ahura Mazda, which was shortened to Ormuz, and then Angramanyu. And those were the archetypes for light and dark. And sure, yeah, Ahriman wanted to consume Ahura Mazda, and yes, absolutely, it's that kind of negative, dense, magnetic whirlpool end of that dipole of Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. And the great translator of these philosophical ideas was Zarathustra or Zoroaster, and he kind of was this initiate priest teacher in his time and era. Some really cool stuff in that early Iranian stuff. Zoroastrianism is very, very interesting. But yeah, it just gets confusing. Now, had you said, had Steiner said all that without having to label it Luciferian and Ahrimanic, it would have been like, to me, it would have been like more successful, because
Totally.
that now I'm not trying to picture things that don't really relate. You could have
Right.
just said these are the dipoles, mysticism and materialism. I don't need the names, but I think that is one of the ways, and this is a Golden Dawn teaching. This is very, very important, actually. I'm glad we kind of stumbled here. Unless a very, 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 very refined vehicle, somebody who puts them in the position to receive knowledge from the quote unquote interior or higher, they will always be tainting or filtering that message through their ruach, which in the Kabbalistic conception is their psyche, their intellective faculties, the lower or the middle, really, 6 Sephirot of the tree of life, the those kinds of the interior person. So your personality, your ego, your passions, your intellect, they're always going to taint that message to a degree. And so in Steiner's instance, yeah, I mean, maybe his ruach, quote unquote, his subconscious, the penultimate expressions of those dipoles was the figure, what he knew or understood about Ahriman, and what he knew and understood about Lucifer. And so he used those names. And in this way, right, channeling gets confusing because you don't even know if you're getting it right, which is why it should remain private, you know. But you know, I think that, to be 100% honest with you, that is one of the most astute assessments of what is going on, you know, bar none, that I have heard from any kind of supposed mainstream channeler. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I agree with them.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a lot of these teachings that he was doing at the time, maybe they were a lot more applicable to the people that he was speaking directly to. And then,
Right.
coming down to us modern day, it's like, what is he talking about? But in terms of that sort of like consumption aspect that you were mentioning with like Ahriman or Angramanu, I think that this links to a lot of what is also maybe associated with Moloch. Maybe do you have any assessment or thoughts on Moloch?
Huh. What I do understand of Moloch is of a very sparse, and I would say, like, you know, I can go down like a short bullet point list of of like etymology and things like that. But I think he was a Philistine god, wasn't he? He wasn't an Israelite god.
I think
He
so.
wasn't a, yeah. I think he was
I don't know.
a Philistine. Not really sure, but you know, they sacrificed children to him. I know that he was like father of abominations, and his name meant king. You know, it's the same root as Melech, right? Because in Semitic languages, there's only consonants. There's no vowels. It was the same thing in, like, you know, Demotic and things like that. Coptic, Egyptian, maybe Coptic had vowels. I don't remember. I learned the alphabet and I took tests on Coptic, but at a certain point, it kind of they all blur, the languages. but but so you kind of have these different variations, right? Because it's really the vowels that alter the pronunciation of words. Whereas if you have the consonant roots, MLK,
Mm-hmm.
Melech, you know that, and especially if it's a Semitic, or, you know, it falls under that umbrella of languages, you know, that means king or something pertaining to these things. So I understand about that much, Moloch, in terms of, like, you know, substantiated stuff. I do understand that there's this kind of cult of Moloch now that's kind of arising in I want to say, the, you know, the dark web areas of people's minds, sort of associating that with child sacrifice. And I mean, it's true historically. I'm not really aware of how much truth there is to that now. I'm not gonna deny or affirm it, but it does make, you know, it makes it kind of makes sense, you know. This I mean, to me, to be honest, we start getting into, like, you know, particularly child sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
All rationale goes out the window. I don't understand it. I can understand human sacrifice. I don't understand child sacrifice. So that's something that, you know, was a reality. um and I'm not saying I would do human sacrifice, but, like, from a historical perspective, I can understand it.
Totally get it. Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
mean, you know.
we've all been online at Starbucks and on a hot day. I can understand sacrificing a few people.
Yeah, it's so interesting to listen to different takes and on all these, ancient deities or gods or forces, and it's fascinating. Like the Moloch, like you were
What do
saying,
you
like,
think?
well, I've been actually writing a kind of a long bit on Moloch just because I became recently interested in what it is or what it means or whatever. Trying to elaborate further because I've made some mentions of it on what I thought it was, and I think it is similar. Like the MLK, like you were saying, the meaning of Moloch, to me, I guess it's commonly regarded as a god associated with child sacrifice, but I think it seems like a more isolated or individual aspect of Moloch. Like uh, a, I think if child sacrifice is going to be done in the name of any deity or in worship of any deity, yes, it's probably Moloch. But I think beyond that, in a more broad sense, is the sacrificial, it's like the sacrificial impulse itself, maybe, but not sacrificial in the way of sacrifice your energy for currency or sacrificing yourself to save a child, more so in regards to sacrificing on the negative end of the polarity, like sacrificing uh for your gain, or sacrificing your soul, or selling out, or using people, like a very sort of underworld subconscious animalistic impulse. Like this term, or idol, or figure, it's been debated and argued about over time by so many different scholars. Like I was looking through all the different scholars that debate about it, and you can kind of look at it all and glean some generalized understanding of what it represents, like etymologically, like you're saying with MLK. And so some will talk about it in association with the notion of rulership, or to rule. Others, to sacrifice or to offer. Other interpretations are to own or possess. There's historical accounts of the MLK rites, or sacrificial rites, associated with indeed child sacrifice, or at least human sacrifice. So, whether figuratively or literally. But if we kind of string it all together, like sacrifice, to possess or own or to rule, we can look at it as sacrificing as the action, to rule as the outcome. Like to possess or own as the result you're doing, the sacrificial act, or for possession, to rule. Like the biblical term that Lemelech or whatever, it's translated to as a Molech sacrifice, but usually it's translated straight to Moloch.
Yeah,
So
they
it
do that.
gets
They do that a lot, especially in like King James version and stuff like that. They won't translate certain words that are like when Christ says you cannot serve two masters, you cannot serve God and mammon. Mammonas meant money,
money.
but
Yeah.
they, he's a regent, and so his whole kingdom relies on money. So he can't very well put that in the Bible, can he? So
No. Yeah. But it's like why? What's beneath the act of sacrifice? It's seeking to own or possess or rule. And I think
yeah,
that's like a very materialistic notion in the sense of the inclination to want or accumulate. So then you could ask, like, what's behind that impulse? What drives it? Or like why is it even there? And
and
go ahead.
this is it. We're getting to the heart of this is actually very Gnostic. This is very, very Gnostic, and I'm liking the direction we're pulling in because yes, what historically, why did people sacrifice? It was a contractual thing. I'm going to give this up, and you're going to give me this. We did that, in ancient Greece. It was done in the grimoire tradition. It was done in Alexandria in the first few centuries CE with, the sort of like itinerant gun for hire magician who was like commissioned by a noble or a merchant to, you look at the PGM and there's spells for like removing chicken bones from your throat and spells for like driving someone mad until they finally fall in love with you. So there's a lot of like quid pro quo where it's like I'm gonna just use the unseen world to get the things I want, but there's always a contract. And one of the interesting things, and I think it's one of the points of departure I have with, I think it's one of the exceptions that I find with the Old Testament in terms of speaking, the God of the Old Testament speaking from the place of the of kind of like a malicious secondhand creator entity. It's when he orders Abraham to go and offer up his son Isaac on the mountain, and Abraham goes, and in tears he's about to do it, and at the last minute God sends an angel, stays his hand, and a lamb appears, and he says
That's
we're
a
going to
rough one.
sacrifice this lamb. Right, but he doesn't go through with it, and he says we're going to sacrifice this lamb instead, but I appreciate your faith type of thing, but I will provide the sacrifice now. You're not going to give your kid to me. I will provide the sacrifice because it's a test of your faith. And so you see that again echoed in the Christ. Christ is referred to as the lamb specifically because of that sacrificial, aspect, and it's provided once again by God. So there's something really interesting there. I'm not sure if that's the direction you were going with, but it just kind of popped into my head.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the sacrificial impulse itself is fascinating to me, and there's a lot behind it. Like all the things that we get into, like consciousness itself and the nature of being and the nature of mind. And if you study the esoteric nature of things, with the Kabbalah tree, like there's the upright above, so to speak, aspects of being, but then there's also the below, the inverted or the quithothic, I never can say that right. The subconscious, yeah, subconscious aspects of being. So, I think, and there's a guy I've talked to, Ian Ferguson. He draws attention to this sort of polarity, which he uses the Luciferian and the Malachian as kind of the poles. And I think it's good on one hand because it's two of the most extreme ends of the consciousness impulses. If you're looking at these things like the Malachian sacrificial rulership, owning, accumulating, more and more greed, devouring at the bottom, and then at the other end, like open source, anything goes, ultimate liberation, give it all away, let it all out type, like polarity. But like it in the Malachian sense, you're talking like so desperately trying to feed a never-ending dark void, and Luciferically, I guess you're giving it all away, evaporating all sense of sacredness almost. All light expanded to the point where it's simply that it's ultimate nothingness itself at its highest expression in that sense. It's like Malachian implosion versus Luciferian explosion. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's interesting, and I think we need them both to exist in order for the spectrum of, to offer the diversity of experience by the way that we utilize them and create with them. If we think of them as like black and white paint on the canvas of life, so to speak, we wouldn't have the multitude of grays to shade and paint our experiences. I think they're both built into the software of being. They're like the essential code for our operating system in some sense. They're like forces or aspects of consciousness that we have to have in order, like I said, to like fill the spectrum. But it's like if you take one to one extreme or the other to the other extreme, I mean that's where you're getting into trouble.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. When I talk about things like excuse me, when I talk about things like, opting out of the system, in terms of Christ, I'm not talking about, necessarily sell everything you own and go live on the street as a hobo. Like that's an extreme.
Yeah.
That's an extreme, and in our day and age, to me, right, it is like we've kind of been throwing around Kabbalistic terms. It's really the middle pillar, and not allowing materiality to pull us to extremes. That's the ultimate sacrifice, because truly what that entails is a death of the old nature and a rebirth to the new, which is one that is perhaps untraversed by us as yet at certain points in our development in our lifetime. The middle path, the path of mildness. Not a lot of people nowadays want to choose the path of mildness. We want to, there's this whole thing where it's like, I want to suck every drop out of the orange, like I want to have, just, there's that that terrible meme about like sliding into your grave and saying, wow, that was fun. It's like, that's what we want to do. We don't want to walk the path of mildness. That's the true sacrifice while we're here is to, because it's really, it's a balance of active and passive states, and it's the alchemical rebus, it's the marriage of Sol and Luna, or a marriage of Sol and Luna, the active and the passive, and it's ultimately the path of reintegration, as Christ said. Straight is the way and narrow the gate, and few there be that find it. And that is ultimately, yeah, exactly what you're saying. And I think also there's something to this idea of child sacrifice, at least symbolically, where it's like this, I'm giving away my innocence, right? Because that's what children symbolically, and in reality are innocence, and you're sacrificing that innocence for material gain. Absolutely for material gain. And I mean, that's kind of what we do in life. We continually, when we're allowed to be brought to extremes of desire, ambition, anger, happiness, even happiness, we sacrifice our innocence. And I think it's in the Phaedrus, but I use this all the time because it's perfect. It goes back to everything. Socrates kind of relates this idea of two horses, one black, one white, and one pulls on the high road, the other one pulls on the low road. And it's the charioteer's job to kind of be able to wrest power from both of those things and direct them so that there can be some kind of productive direction to travel in. And what he says is, again, I'll paraphrase, but I'm kind of close. You are just as much in thrall to the illusion of life when you are happy as when you are sad. A lot of people think that spirituality is finding this kind of happiness. I would not say that that's true. Again, if you're excited, if you are happy, what does that tell you? It means in the moment, in the present moment, you are fully invested in the illusion. And again, I'm not saying that you choose this kind of like way of don't do anything, don't be anything, sit on a log and meditate. I don't really think that that's helpful either in our current day and age. But the understanding, of I'm on the wheel, right? I'm on the wheel of fortune. And this is kind of a cynical way, and a lot of people poke fun at me for it. But the thing is, once you kind of get it, you understand. When I'm at the top of the wheel, call it the wheel of fortune, the wheel of the tarot, or the wheel of samsara. When I'm at the top of the wheel, there is nowhere to go but the bottom. But conversely, when I am at the bottom of the wheel, there is nowhere to go but the top. And kind of in that way, you begin to train yourself to be at the center of the wheel. The hub is still while the peripheries revolve. So that's kind of where you eventually want to get, but it happens in your mind first. It's an attitude. It's a way of looking at the world first. There's that famous saying, I forget who said it, but free your mind, your ass will follow.
Yeah. And to me, it's like, it's all these mythologies of gods and goddesses. They all represent archetypal potentialities. All of these stories, whether they happened physically in the past, is irrelevant because there's nothing new under the sun. It's all happening now. Like sacrifice happens every day for better or worse, and spiritualization happens every day for better or worse. It's just to what level do you want to take it, and to what level do you want to embody these archetypes, because they holographically exist within us all. That's kind of how I see it, and I'm not saying I'm right, but I'm saying that's kind of a comprehensive way that I've come to make sense of it from evaluating the different information. And I have in correspondence with my experience interacting with other conscious beings and observing human nature. And so I think it's like the Moloch thing, maybe it's like the negative polarity of that other polarity. Like there's like nested polarities. So if we have like the Luciferic, let's use this terminology for the sake of this discussion. If we have the Luciferic on one end and then the Molochian or Ahrimanic or whatever on the other end, and then it's like within that sacrificial node, there's also polarities. One being, because you're speaking of, there's like the positive aspects or the right ways of sacrifice, and then there's like you can, I guess we could use positive and negative for the sake of the point. But yeah, and then it's like, then we can get into just knowing that these exist within all of us, and that we have the ability to go into whatever path we choose with what whatever we decide where we want to go, while hopefully keeping in mind and understanding another part of this whole algorithm, karma. And this is where I get, kind of confused with anyone that decides to want to go on a hard Malachian, quote unquote, path of materialistic domination, and get more and more money and fuck them, sell them vaccines, sell them whatever, and make more money. Fuck it, sacrifice a large part of the population. It gets me more power, more rulership, more possessions, because I think karma is real. You do reap what you sow. So ultimately, if you're operating by that kind of fuck it, screw it, screw them all mentality, lie to them, you can basically fuck yourself, and you're already fucking yourself whether you know it or not.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole thing. Like, along with this kind of secularization of worldview, like to the nth degree, completely, through educational systems and things like this, media. You're gaslighted. You're made to feel like a fucking idiot because you believe in anything that transcends, dead materialism. And so over time, right, being young, being impressionable, you know, all the worst shit was marketed towards kids when I was a kid, man.
Yeah.
Like, it's only in retrospect that you realize it. Like, I was watching trash that was brainwashing me toward a very particular worldview, and from that worldview came this vicious, Venus flytrap of socioeconomic Darwinism,
Mm.
which is basically exactly what you're saying: survival of the fucking fittest. Now, I don't have to run from a panther anymore, but I've got to figure out how to, fuck him before he fucks me, and, make as much money as possible. And what has that done? Sure, you got the nice house, you got the nice whatever, you got the trophy wife, but, you know, how much do you sacrifice? How much of your time, the only non-recoupable resource, how much of that have you fucking given away? For what?
Mm.
Can you even enjoy it? Has the person you have had to become even somebody who is able to enjoy the things you have accumulated? And then not only that, but, people like that, they're not going to even stop to think for a second about the metaphysical aspect. But, what happens to your soul? You know,
Yes.
What happens then? That suffering, that itch, that pain that you take out on other people, that presents itself as this nasty boil on your personality. You know where that's coming from? It's coming from the aridity of your interior environment. Your soul is suffocating.
Amen. This was an absolute banger of a conversation. Is there anything else that you'd like to add in regards to any of the subjects that we've talked about before we kind of close out?
I think I am wrung out like a sponge. I have had so much fun doing this with you. I'm very glad that this conversation is kind of the inaugural conversation of the Aetherica Astral Garden thing that we're doing. I couldn't be happier to be doing it with anyone else but you. And I think our conversations are something really special. And I I'd like, this was just kind of just happened. We were gonna do like a podcast interview tonight, like a conversation. But I'd like, I want us to go back and forth uh a little bit more, because I really think that you are a very good and balancing counterpoint for a lot of the, at the very, we agree, I think, on a lot of core things, but I think that our delivery methods yeah, kind of balance each other out. So I think that you're a very good counterforce to the conversation.
Vice versa. Complimentary indeed. Where would you like to direct people if they could find out more about any of the projects that you've got going on? Maybe your channels, your social media, anything.
Yeah, obviously it's the youtube.com/ at Arcanum, ARCANVM. That's the YouTube channel. I do weekly podcasts and educational presentations on the Western esoteric traditions and related topics. Um, I've I'm teaching a course with Jamie Paul Lamb and Mark Stavish through the Institute of Hermetic Studies, 3 books of occult philosophy by Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. We're going to be teaching a course on that. It's called The Foundation of Western Esotericism Explored. I'll be doing book 1. Jamie will be doing book 2. Mark will be doing book 3. That's running every Monday from August 21st to September 25th. So 6 weeks, 2 hours per session, 2 sessions per book. I think it's a fantastic value, and you can look that up on the Institute for Hermetic Studies Teachable platform. And I will link to that on my Facebook page and Instagram, all that stuff. That's a big thing coming up soon. I would encourage everybody to kind of hop on that, because I feel like there's been a lot of interest around it, and if you can get a seat, you'd really like to be able to as soon as possible. And how about you, man? Where would you like to direct people?
Check me out if anybody's interested on the Philosophical Minds podcast. You could find that on all the major RSS feeds, YouTube as well, Philosophical Minds podcast, and then on the Instagram at Philosophical Minds podcast. So check me out there. And yeah, thank you so much again, Ike. And this is going to be an awesome channel that we are creating here. So looking forward to the future.
Amen.
All right, brother.
Absolutely.